Alright. Okay, the next one. So you're given this polynomial x cubed minus 5x squared plus 4x minus 6. It has 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. So the name of it, your biggest exponent is a 3. So it is called a cubic. 4 terms, there's no name. So polynomial with 4 terms. Okay, so there's a difference between coefficients and terms. Terms are always separated by a plus or a minus. So the 4 terms, one of them is x cubed. That's a term. And you have to take the minus with it. So the next term would be a negative 5x squared. Then the next term is the linear term, the 4x, and the last one is just a constant, negative 6. So that would be D, but coefficients. Coefficients are how many of those pieces you've got. Okay, so the coefficients, how many of the cubes do you have? And this is the number in front. So you got 1. How many squares do you have? 1, negative 5. How many x's do you have? 4. And that is actually it. So it's B. This has a special name. It is called a constant. So it's not a coefficient. This number all by itself, it is a constant. The coefficients are how many letters you've got, how many variables you've got. So you got 1 cube, negative 5 squares, and 4 x's. Those are your 3 coefficients. Okay, now we give you the polynomials and you gotta factor them. So this is the product of some polynomial multiplication. See if you can work backwards. Most of them are gonna look like this. Most of them are gonna be like a binomial times a binomial. So here we go. Number 1, move 1. First thing you do, always try and shrink it down. Divide each of these 3 by the greatest common factor. So the greatest amount you can, divide them all by 5. So it's going to be 5 times n squared minus 13n plus, if you do 150 divided by 5, 30. Okay, now, if it starts with a 1, then it's going to be kind of, these are the first ones we did. They're pretty easy. They're not bad. So here's what you're looking for. You are looking for something that is going to times and give you the 30, but it adds to give you the middle. So it adds to give a negative 13. So you look on your factor sheet, start going through the factors of 31 and 32 and 15, 3 and 10, 5 and 6, and you should be drawn to a 3 and a 10. So it has to times to give you a positive 30. So that means they are both positive or they are both negative. And because it's got to add to give you a negative 13, they both have to be negative. So we're going to go n, minus 3, minus 10. And you check your work before you submit it. So if you distribute through n times n, that gives you n squared. N times a minus 10 is a minus 10n. Minus 3 times n is minus 3n. Minus 3 times minus 10 is a plus 30. And these are like terms. So if you have a minus 10 and a minus 3, that's minus 13n plus 30. And if you times that all by 5, that will give you what we started. So your final answer has to be this. There's 3 factors. 5 times n minus 3 times n minus 10. So on the test, there's really no half credits on these. You're tested on the signs. So the signs are a big deal. Not really so much the numbers, but it's the signs. So if you miss the signs, you're going to miss it all. You have to get the signs right. The signs are a big deal. Okay, next one. you got a binomial, so divide them both by as much as you can. The greatest you can take out of each is 5. And if you divide them both by 5, it's going to be 5 times 9x squared minus 16. Okay, now, these are special. So that's a perfect square, that's a perfect square. If you have a bunch of perfect squares showing up, they're actually pretty easy. You're just going to take square roots. So how they times to get a 9x squared is a 3x and a 3x. And how they times to get a 16 is a 4 and a 4. But it's got to be a negative 16, so one's positive and one is minus. And these are conjugates, so they're the exact same. 3x plus 4, 3x minus 4. If you have them the exact same, but one's plus, one's a minus, your middle zeroes out. So this is missing a middle term. It just has kind of the beginning and the end. It's missing a middle, because if you start timesing through 3x times 3x, that's 9x squared. 3x times a minus 4 is a minus 12x. 4 times 3x is a plus 12x. 4 times a minus 4 is a minus 16. These like terms are 0. So you just have 9x squared minus 16, and then times that by 5. So your final answer is kind of like the first. There's 3 terms. 5 times 3x plus 4 times 3x minus 4. Okay, your third one. If you divide first all these by 2, they're all even, so shrink them down, cut them all in half, so it's going to be 2 times x squared plus 11x plus 28. Okay, there's no squares, no special squares, and it starts with a 1, so it's going to be pretty easy. You're just looking for something that will times to give you 28, but it's got to add to give you 11, and everything is positive, so everything's going to stay positive. The numbers you should choose is 4 and 7. So that means it's going to be 2 times x plus 4, x plus 7. Okay, let's do some more. Let's do 3 more. Now, this guy, you can't really shrink it down. It's simplified as far as it's going to go. So, and there's no square roots, so this is just the first type that we learned. Let's figure out what is going to times to make a 90, but add to make a minus 19. And we're going to choose the 10 and the 9, and they've got to times and give a positive 90, but they've got to add and create a negative 19, so they're both going to be negative. And it's going to look x minus 9, x minus 10. The order doesn't matter, the signs matter. They both have to be negative. So if you're second guessing yourself, times them through and see if that matches up. Alright. Okay, the middle one, 9 you can divide by 3, 30 you can divide by 3, but 25 you can't, so that's it. Now, these are special, these are both perfect squares, and you don't really worry about the middle. Just focus on the start and the end. And if you see squares in the start and the end, then we're just going to square root. So, how they create the 9x squared is a 3x and a 3x. How they create the 25 is a 5 and a 5. Now let's worry about the middle. You've got to add them to create a minus 30, so it's going to be minus minus. And let's check it real quick. 3x times 3x, that does create the 9x squared. 3x times a minus 5, that creates a minus 15x. Minus 5 times 3x creates a minus 15x. And a minus 5 times a minus 5 creates a 25. And now I'll combine these, and we've got 9x squared. A minus 15 minus 15 is minus 30. and we're back to where we started. So that's it. That'll work. Those are the two factors. Okay, last one is, now they're the same numbers. They're special. These are square roots. So the perfect squares take a square root. So you are going to create a 25x squared, you're going to go 5x and 5x. To create a 9, you're going to go 3 and 3. But it's got to be a negative 9, so one's a plus, one's a minus. And if one's a plus, one's a minus, it's going to zero out the middle and you'll have no middle. So we're in business. That's it. Okay, let's do some harder ones. Now, you got 4 terms. So we've got a cube, a square, a degree 1, and a constant. So anytime you got polynomial with 4 terms, we're going to group them. So let's split it up into 2 separate groups and we'll just go right down the middle. So if we call this group 1, 4a cubed minus 5a squared. Let's take out of those 2 pieces as much as you can. Let's take an a squared out. So if you take an a squared out of each piece, it's going to be a squared times 4a minus 5. Okay, now group 2, 32a and a minus 40. Divide both of these by 8. So between group 1 and group 2 is just a big plus. If you divide both these by 8, it's going to be 8 times the leftovers. 32 divided by 8, that's 4a. Minus 40 divided by 8 is minus 5. And now group 1 has a 4a minus 5 and group 2 has a 4a minus 5. So you're going to factor out of both those groups a 4a minus 5. So that becomes my greatest common factor. So 4a minus 5 times the leftovers. A squared plus 8. And then look at your groups, see if you can shrink them down any further. 4a and 5, they got nothing in common. A squared and 8 got nothing in common, so that is your final answer. Okay, the middle one, if you got 10m squared minus 15m, shrink it down. They both have m's and you can divide them both by 5. So if you take a 5m out of each, it's going to be 5m times 2m minus 3, and that, in this case, that's as far as you can go. You can go no further. So your greatest common factor is 5m, divide it by the greatest common factor, and you're done. Okay, the last one's kind of like the one we just did. It's 4 terms, so let's group them. Let's split them right down the middle. So if you go the 75x cubed minus 15x squared. Okay, let's divide each of these by 5. And you can take x squared out of each. So if you take a 5x squared out of each, it's going to be 5. Maybe you can go more than 5. I wonder if you can go 15. Let's do 75 divided by 15. Okay, that'll work. 15 goes into 75. So 5, because look, if I would have done 5, I would have got this. So if you would have taken 5x squared, you would have had left over 25x. No, 75 divided by 5 is, I'm making a mess. So if we would have left it as 5, this is how you know that's not the greatest. So 5x squared. 75 divided by 5 is 15x, and 15 divided by 5 minus 3. Now 15 and 3 are not, they can go again. You can actually divide both these by 3. So if you can go again, that means you did not take the greatest. So if you can divide it by 3 and you could divide it by 5, that means you got to divide it by 15 from the get-go. So the greatest number you can take out of each is going to be 15. So if we take 15x squared out of each, 75 divided by 15 is going to be 5x, and a minus 15 divided by 15 is just a minus 1. Okay, now group 2, so let's put a big fat plus. Group 2, this minus has to go with the 45, so it's a minus 45x plus 9. Okay, we're going to divide both those by the greatest amount possible, divide them both by 9. So if you divide them both by 9, it's going to be 9 times a minus 45 divided by 9 is a minus 5x, and 9 divided by 9 is 1. And now group 1 and group 2 almost match up. In group 1 it's a 5x minus 1, but in group 2 it's a minus 5x plus 1. So I just need to change the sign. So don't divide by 9, divide by negative 9. Because if you divide by negative 9, a negative divided by negative is positive, and a positive divided by negative is a negative. So 5x minus 1, 5x minus 1, so your final answer is going to be 5x minus 1 in one group, and your other group is going to be 15x squared minus 9. Okay, now look at them, see if you can shrink them down. So that one's done. A 1 and a 5 got nothing in common. But 15 and 9, that is not done. So that means at the very beginning, we probably should have divided them all by 3. Because a 15 and a 9, you can divide those by 3. So here we go. If you take that 15x squared minus 9, if you divide that by 3, that is 3 times 5x squared minus 3. So you've got to put this in place of the 15x squared minus 9, because 15, this is not done. So you got to make sure you look at them, what you think your answer is. If you can shrink it down further, keep going. So your final answer is going to be 3 times 5x squared minus 3 times 5x minus 1. The order of those do not matter. The only thing that matters is the signs. As long as your signs match up, you're in business. Alright, now let's start solving some equations. So these equations right here, first you distribute times the 8 through. So on the left, there's no like terms, everything's simplified. So you got minus 9 minus 2n equals 64n plus 64 minus 7. So these are like terms, you can combine those. So if you go 64 minus 7, 64n plus 57, and then on the left you've got a minus 9 minus 2n. And then you just kind of cops and robbers, so I'm going to go plus 2n plus 2n. So I got a minus 9 equals 66n plus 57. So I'm going to minus the 57, minus the 57. A minus 9 and a minus 57 is a minus 66 equals 66n. Divide by 66, divide by 66, n equals a negative 1. So that's a linear equation. Now if we try to tackle the next one, you've noticed before too far that it's a degree 2, so it's a quadratic. So the moment we've got a degree 2, we're going to do it totally different than cops and robbers. We're going to get everything on one side, and on the other side we want it totally bare, we want a 0. So I'm going to move this over to this side. So we're going to go plus 6 squares, and we're going to plus 6 squares. So I'm going to have 1x squared plus 2x, and on the right I'm going to have 0, which is what we want. We want it to be 0. Now we want to factor it, turn it to a times problem. So if you factor this, take the greatest common factor out, divide both of these by x. So it's going to be x times x plus 2 equals 0. Okay, now we got what we want. You have a times problem and your solution is 0. The only way you can times and end up at a 0 is if you're timesing by 0. So either this group is the 0 or this group is the 0. So your first group is kind of done. But this group, solve for x, minus 2, x is going to be a minus 2. So degree 2 means there's going to be 2 solutions, and these are your 2 solutions right here. Okay, this guy right here, we solve it, it's degree 1, so it's just linear. So just do your cops and robbers. I'm going to minus 5b, minus 5b, minus 12, and you should have this. 3b equals negative 6 divided by 3 divided by 3, b equals negative 2. One solution, pretty slick. This one is degree 2, it's totally different, it's quadratic. Get everything on one side. Let's move all this over to the left. So I'm going to minus 4, so I got r squared minus 5 equals a minus 4r. So let's plus 4r on both sides. Now on the left side, there's no like terms. So we're going to go r squared plus 4r minus 5. Okay, now we're going to turn it to a times problem. So let's factor it. So how they times to create the r squared is pretty easy. That's just a r and a r. How they times to create the minus 5 is a 5 and a 1. That's the only way you can times and create 5, and one of them's got to be negative because they need the times and create a negative. The 1 is negative, the 5 is positive, because you need to add and make a positive 4. So you got 2 options. You can go 1 minus 5, or you can go 5 minus 1. 1 minus 5 is a negative 4, 5 minus 1 is 4, and you need to go with the positive 4, so that is it. The 5 is positive, the 1 is negative. Now, the product is 0, so that means you're timesing by a 0. So either this group, the r plus 5, is the 0, or this group, the r minus 1, is the 0. So for the first group to be 0, solve for r, just minus 5, r equals a negative 5. The second group, plus 1, r equals 1. So those are your 2 zeros. Those will give you 0. Okay, let's do 2 more. So bring this over. We are degree 2, so get everything on one side. So let's plus 6x, and you have x squared minus 1x minus 20 is 0. Now factor it, turn it to a times problem. What is going to times to give you a minus 20, but it's got to add and give you a minus 1. And you look through your options, you're going to go with the 4 and a 5, and you are going to go with a minus 5 and a plus 4. So plus 4 minus 5, they will times to give you a negative 20, and they will add to give you a minus 1. So now you got a times problem, your answer is 0. So that means either the x plus 4 is 0, or the x minus 5 is 0. So for the x plus 4 group, for this group to be 0, x has to be a negative 4. And for this group to be 0, x has to be 5. Okay, last one. Let's move this over. So let's add 4 squares, and let's add x and add x. And that will give me 1x squared, and that is a 0. Those are 0, that's a 0. So I got 49. So minus 49, minus 49. So I got x squared minus 49 equals 0. If you factor it, this is a special one. That's a perfect square, that's a perfect square. So I'm going to go x, 7, 7. One's a plus, one's a minus, and that is why we have no middle. They zeroed out. So this group is a 0, or this group is a 0. So x would have to be, to make this group a 0, x got to be a negative 7. To make this group a 0, x got to be a plus 7. And there you go.